I've been requesting the JBL Bar 9.1 for roughly a year and a half, and in this review me showing if it's actually worth its price tag, because the soundbar with its detachable speakers can be found for around £620 in the UK, while in the US it can be found for $1,200. Now to kick things off, we're going to talk about its build quality and design, and of course we're going to talk about those detachable speakers. Now they can pop off from the side of the soundbar and can be placed by your sofa or indeed just behind it for you to get the best surround sound experience, specifically if you're watching Dolby Atmos or DTSX content, and yes, we'll touch upon that shortly. Now indeed, if you're going to be running such a setup, you'll be pleased to know that JBL has included these little covers which sit around the wireless speakers and of course the soundbar itself. This adds to the overall look and design, and furthermore means that you don't have any connectors which are sitting exposed. On that note, the wireless speakers have a quoted 10-hour battery life and also can be recharged from empty to full in roughly 3 hours. They can be docked to the main soundbar unit, or you can use an external power source, in other words via your wall socket or let's say a multi-USB plug, and here via a micro USB connection it will take the same amount of time. Note the micro USB cables are not included in the box, and therefore you'll have to purchase a set if you don't have them already in your household. Now, in terms of the battery life claims, I will say that my battery life on the wireless speakers was far less than what the manufacturer claims. After listening to 2 to 3 hours on a single sitting, I suddenly got a notification on the soundbar to say that the rear speakers need charging and the power is low. Now, past this, in terms of the overall aesthetics of the soundbar, I must say they're pretty pleasing. Here you've got a nice sort of silver look around the wireless speakers and the main soundbar unit, and of course you have got a wireless subwoofer, which is absolutely humongous, should I point out. And we'll talk about bass quantity and quality further down in the sound quality section, but what I'll say over here is that the subwoofer unit does not need a cable to be connected onto the soundbar and operates on a wireless format, but of course you do need power to the subwoofer at all times if you so wish to use it. Now, for you to interact with the JBL Bar 9.1, there are some physical buttons found at the top of the soundbar, allowing you to power on or off, change the input, and indeed adjust the volume. But of course here you want more functionalities, and here's where the remote kicks in. There's a variety of different functions, such as adjusting the Dolby Atmos level, the rear speaker level, and the bass volume as well, alongside the overall media volume and changing the inputs as well. Suffice to say that the remote control is fully comprehensive, although the overall look and design of it just feels a little bit cheap, at least in my opinion, for a soundbar that costs around £620 and or $1,200. And so what about when it comes to connectivity? Well, first off we'll talk about wireless, and here you have got Apple AirPlay and also Chromecast for you to utilize, which means that you can stream music over the air in a higher quality in comparison to using Bluetooth. The reason I say that is because here the Bluetooth, it has got the SBC codec only, which is the lowest quality codec, and as such has got degraded audio performance over Bluetooth, and I would only resort to this if you want to, let's say, quickly pair up to listen to some music and don't want to be doing any serious audio listening. If you do want to do that, then I would really suggest using the other wireless formats instead. Now, given it does support Apple AirPlay and also Chromecast, it's no surprise that this does have Wi-Fi and can also be set up via the Google Home app, and therefore allows you to add it to your home, for example, and add it to a variety of other speakers you might have in your household. Now, should you wish to connect up to your router in a wired way, you can do so via the Ethernet port which is provided at the back of the soundbar, and here you'll also find an 8-pin power socket and also an optical input, a HDMI input, and an HDMI ARC output. Now here the output supports eARC and ARC, which is great to see for uncompressed metadata, which is very useful for Dolby Atmos content and DTSX of course, but it's a shame that JBL have only included a singular HDMI input, and here if you've got a multitude of devices and your TV doesn't support it, you might be left a little bit stranded, other than of course getting, let's say, an HDMI splitter. So with all of that in mind, I should also mention that the soundbar does support Dolby Digital, Dolby Atmos, and DTSX, which is all great to see. And of course, if you can't do any of this and you're watching, let's say, non-Dolby content or non-HD content, you do have the PCM input as well, although that's the lowest quality that you're going to be expecting. Now, this perfectly leads me onto the overall specifications of the soundbar unit itself as to what the driver configuration is. Now, in terms of total output, you've got 830 watts, where 400 watts of it is comprised within the soundbar itself. Now within the soundbar you've got 4 racetrack drivers, 2 upward firing full range drivers and 3 0.75 inch tweeters. Within the detachable speakers, each of them supports a upward firing full range driver and a 0.75 inch tweeter as well. Suffice to say, there are a lot of drivers for you to play around with, and this does mean that the overall content that you'll be listening should be really expanded and or give you a fantastic experience. But of course that's all on paper, so what about when it comes to practice? Well, for you to really experience it, you're going to have to sit in front of the soundbar yourself. Now I do appreciate that's not always plausible, so as a result we're going to get into a sound demo. Now first off we're going to be using a music demo, and I'll be cycling through the different modes, and the song we'll be using is from Priya J, it's titled Falling. You can find it down in the description below in case you're interested, be it to listen or indeed purchase it. And then we'll also go into a kind of piece to camera, in other words for me presenting the BMW i4 on Totally EV, and here I'll give you an indication of how it presents in terms of, well, normal spoken content.
It's the only way I know how to play this game to success. I'm not quite sussed it. When I reach the brink, don't stop to think. I always sing. Now I'm falling. It's my imagination. This constant sin 1,000 miles ahead. Then in my own mind, but it's slow. I'm always hoping. Crawling, I am crawling. No back to falling from so high. Falling from so high. The thing is my imagination is constantly racing. And I'm living in my own mind, but it's I'm always hoping. When I reach the brink, don't stop to think. I always think, and now
CarPlay in both a wired and wireless form. Furthermore, the data which is fed through the screen also feeds into your instrument cluster and the head-up display should you have the option fitted on your vehicle like we did. And in this respect it means that you can quickly glance at your navigation data even if you're using third-party mobile operating systems in comparison to the built-in navigation system that BMW provides, and means that you can keep your eyes planted on the road rather than having to constantly glance down towards the center of the dashboard. So with those audio demos out of the way, we're going to get onto my subjective opinion in terms of how it performs across the frequency range, and further down we'll be talking about its soundstage and of course honing into Dolby Atmos with a dedicated audio demo for that as well. Now in terms of its sub-bass extension, the JBL Bar 9.1 is simply phenomenal. Its 10-inch woofer driver, in other words the subwoofer, delivers a fantastic low-end extension. While it does tail off at around 34 Hz, I must say I was seriously impressed. Indeed, the subwoofer unit is seriously impressive, and it's been a long time since I've been able to hear my door frames rattle, and this was the case when I was dialing up the levels in terms of the bass EQ. Now in my case I ran it on level 2 for the majority of the time. If I want a little bit more bass I'd go adventurous to a level 3. Level 4 and level 5 were just all too much for my room's acoustic, but of course that will depend in terms of your own room size and or the amount of bass you just want to have, or indeed if you just want to annoy your neighbours. Now as for its mid-bass quantity and quality, both were excellent. Here you have plenty of punch and also plenty of quality, that one that can appreciate both in terms of music content or let's say if you're watching some movies. I had no problems whatsoever in this department either, and yet again that's really thanks to the massive subwoofer that comes included within the soundbar. However, it's not all rosy, whereby the mid-range does take a knock-on effect. It's also a shame over here that you don't have dedicated EQs via the remote control, whereby allowing you to adjust the mid-range. It's a similar sort of behavior I've noted in other soundbars, including from JBL, and it's a shame that the JBL Bar 9.1, being one of the more premium soundbars out there on the market, does not offer this functionality. As a result, the mid-range is somewhat recessed and pushed back, and really can't compete with, let's say, the likes of the creative SXFI Carrier, which does a far better job in this department, and likewise from a few other soundbars out there on the market, namely from the likes of Samsung and or namely Bose. Now in this respect, the soundbar does feel a little bit recessed, and I'm not really sure if it came across in the video demo, but when I was speaking to camera, I noted that my voice sounded a little bit drowned out and just didn't come across as well eloquently as I wanted. Similarly, when I was listening to Priya's vocals, in other words, female vocals in tracks, it again just sounds a little bit subdued and pushed back. Now, don't get me wrong, in the grander scheme of things, it's perfectly fine, but in comparison to other soundbars which cost around the same price and or are more expensive, the JBL Bar 9.1 really can't compete in this department. Now, on the plus side, the highs extend really well. I had no problems whatsoever when it came to the sibilance or harshness. Here it was tuned to perfection, at least in terms of my own hearing range and in terms of my own subjective input. I also like the fact that JBL have thought it through, whereby they've used tweeters not only in the main soundbar unit but also in the detachable speakers, which means that when you are using, let's say, Dolby Atmos content and using metadata that is incorporating height information, the tweeters still come alive at the rear of the room and therefore give you a nice fulfilling sound, and as a result keep you excited and entertained when watching such content. And the same could be applied when you're watching non-Dolby Atmos content, such as when you're watching music or indeed, let's say, watching back YouTube commentary. You can still appreciate the content you're watching because the highs provide that extra little bit of excitement. Now, this does perfectly lead me into the Soundstage, and before we get onto my subjective opinions here, I'm going to give you a Dolby Atmos demo. Now, we're going to be using Transformers Age of Extinction because it does support Dolby Atmos, and we're going to be flicking on and off between Dolby Atmos. Hopefully my microphones will be able to pick it up, but nevertheless also check out the annotations down below just to be sure that you are understanding how the overall setup is running. So with that demo out of the way, I do have to talk about Dolby Atmos. The overall experience that I got with the JBL Bar 9.1 was simply phenomenal. And that's truthfully thanks to the combination of the drivers found within the soundbar and also the detachable speakers. The combination of having rear speakers and indeed forward-firing speakers completely surround your room with noise. And in my respect, when I was listening back to content such as the Transformers demo, I found that I was absolutely outstanding at what I was able to hear. The also separation that you get, the instrument separation you get, is also similarly impressive. And here I will say that if anyone is watching DTS:X or Dolby Atmos content, you're truly going to appreciate the full prowess of the JBL Bar 9.1 in comparison to soundbars that don't have rear speakers and or have got a limited number of drivers and or channels. Now, even if you're not going to be using the detachable speakers in, well, a wireless format and going to be using them docked onto the soundbar, the experience is still very impressive. So as a result, if you were to run out of battery on the wireless speakers, you still get a really pleasant experience and one that's very impressive. Now, don't get me wrong, it won't compete with the likes of having those rear speakers, but it's still good in comparison to soundbars out there that do have a similar non-wireless setup. Now, with the Dolby Atmos content out of the way, I should also talk about non-Dolby Atmos content. And here, similarly, the JBL Bar 9.1 really was impressive. I still felt that when I was watching to, let's say, my BMW i4 review, or let's say, listening to Priya J's track, which is obviously not filmed in Dolby Atmos, or indeed recorded in that, here I found that the overall audio reproduction was still very impressive. Instrument separation was excellent, and in terms of the overall width and depth, while it did sound a little bit more narrow in comparison to some other soundbars out there in the market, I still felt very much well involved with the content that I was watching and the overall experience that I was attaining from the JBL Bar 9.1. Ultimately, what I'm trying to convey over here is that the overall sound quality reproduction is seriously impressive. Now, don't get me wrong, it doesn't do phenomenally well in the mid-range department and does sound recessed and pushed back in comparison to other soundbars out there on the market, but on the whole, given the overall price tag that JBL is asking for, at least in the UK, I can definitely see myself recommending it, specifically for those people who want rear speakers and or want a soundbar that does a really fantastic job at Dolby Atmos or DTSS content. And in this respect, it's very easy to recommend, and as a result, it actually gets my Best Buy award. Now, I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts of the JBL Bar 9.1 down in the comments section below. And of course, if you like this independent detailed review and want to see more and haven't already, definitely do consider liking, subscribing, and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.